So last night, Jocelyn talked about the prodigal son story, and really more specifically how the two sons are different. I think it's interesting in the book of Luke, the whole story is only 22 verses long. It's basically a paragraph, and yet it tells us so much about these characters. So we know the younger son asks for his share of the estate, leaves home, makes a series of horrible choices. He basically does a speed run on how to ruin your life. The older son chooses to stay back, help on the farm, but his motives aren't quite as clear. Did he feel a sense of duty and responsibility to stay, or was he just trying to get his father's good graces, gain his approval? Now, I remember first reading that story at a very young age in Sunday school, and the theme was you were supposed to relate to the younger son and realize that no matter how badly you mess up, you can always be forgiven, which is true. But when you're in the third grade reading that, it's not easy to relate to a guy who leaves home and blows all his money on partying and gambling. And remember, this is Bible times gambling too. It's not like he was gambling on the NFL playoffs. It's probably like two goats racing down a hill. No, I found the older son to be more relatable. Most kids listen to their parents, not all the time, a majority of the time. The older son, he does everything that's asked of him, everything he's supposed to do, but he isn't fulfilled. He is angry and jealous that the brother who screwed up gets a welcome home party, and in a way that brother gets let off the hook. I think that's more relatable, the feeling that you did everything right, you studied for the test, but you still didn't get a good grade. You don't feel satisfied. The older brother represents responsibility. He stays at the farm, listens to his father, and the younger brother represents freedom. He leaves home, does exactly what he wants, nothing holding him down, nobody telling him what to do. But at different points, they both feel isolated and unfulfilled because they don't balance those two traits. And I think most of us would agree, as we get older, the amount of personal freedom we have steadily increases. You have more freedom in high school than middle school, then you graduate high school, you have even more, and so on. For the most part, it's pretty cool. You guys probably remember the first time you stayed at home alone, or for some of you, the first time you drove a car by yourself. But more freedom almost always comes with more responsibility, and that can be intimidating. You gain mobility and new experiences, but the price is giving up the metaphorical safety net. Over the years, I've heard a bunch of wilderness trail staff talk about leading their first hike, and on day one, realizing, oh wait, if something goes wrong, I'm in charge. I remember the first time I led a hike, kids would come up to me like, I have a headache, I have a blister, like, so what? And then I remember like, oh wait, I'm the guy, I have to fix this. This one time I was leading a group, it was an all boys group, because this church from Florida would split their hiking groups, girl, boy. Speaking from experience, I don't think it's the best idea, because if there's no girls around to impress, guys just end up sitting around doing nothing. Just total nihilism. And our last night, we were supposed to camp beside Watauga Lake, and we get there and there's signs everywhere saying bear activity, no camping. What a weird coincidence that bear showed up this morning. I was telling this story about bears. But we were getting picked up there the next morning, so there's nowhere else to go. Now, when I was in high school, I learned my lesson about camping around bears the hard way. Me and some friends were camping in Shiny Rock Wilderness, which is just up past Canton, which is notorious for being like the black bear capital of Western North Carolina. There's so many bears, they named a mediocre football team after them. And we did everything wrong. We fried sausage in a pan, threw the leftovers 10 feet outside of camp, and when my friend said, should we hang a bag? I was like, we'll be fine. It's like 9 o'clock, the bears are sleeping. And as you can guess, the next morning, everyone's pack was destroyed. My one friend actually borrowed a pack from his boss. It was the worst one. It looked like going through a paper shredder. But ever since that experience, I learned my lesson. And so at Watauga Lake, I told my trail group, put all their food and toothpaste in a big trash bag to hang as a bear bag. And you would think, since it was our last night, that there wouldn't be a lot left. But I remember they were pulling out full jars of Nutella with the seal still on it, unopened sausage. I couldn't believe how much food they had. They had enough to go for 4 more days. And so I packed it all in a big bag, and I walked a good ways outside camp, looking for a nice straight tree limb to throw a rope over and hang it. And the bag was way heavier than I expected, and it was already dark. I ended up hanging it from this limb that I probably knew wasn't high enough, and looking back, I don't know why I did it, but maybe I was feeling lazy because it was late, and maybe I didn't feel responsibility because it was the last night and I didn't have a lot of food in the bag. So I hang it up, and then when I got back to camp, I was just shining my headlamp along the tree line, and I see two eyes reflecting back at me about 30 yards away. This one kid in our group had a wiffle ball bat. I grabbed that out of his bag, tapped the tree a couple times, like, bah, bah, and it turned around and ran away. But the group exploded after that. Remember, these are Florida guys, so they were too scared to sleep. They wanted to take watch all night. Like, I'll take the first watch. What are you going to do if you take first? One of the dads was throwing rocks in the direction of the bear. And then I was in the middle of all this chaos trying to explain that black bears aren't dangerous, they just want food, but nobody was listening to me. Finally got them all calmed down, and they went to sleep, and next morning I got up early, went to get the bag. Of course the bears got it. There was trash everywhere, Pop-Tart wrappers, plastic, the jar of Nutella, they bit it completely in half and licked the jar clean on the inside. Probably like the best day of that bear's life, eating all that stuff. So I gathered up all the trash and I stuffed it in the trash can by the lake picnic area. And when I came back to camp, empty-handed, I told him that the bag had disappeared, that a human must have taken it. I felt like such a dummy for letting it happen. I didn't want to tell the group the truth. And not only did they believe that stupid lie, when we got back the next morning, they told everybody else how a mysterious hiker had stolen all of our food. I had to listen to everybody at the lodge talk about this ridiculous story just because I was too embarrassed to take responsibility. Just like the prodigal son in his story, I discovered that personal freedom can feel like this hot potato where you really want it, it seems fun, you obsess over it, and the second you get it, like the weight of potential consequences is pressing down on you. And when things go wrong, oftentimes, there's no one to blame but yourself. The ability to make our own choices seems like the ultimate goal in life, but more choices doesn't automatically mean more freedom. Sometimes it means making the most of opportunities that are right in front of you, not waiting for something better to come along that you hope will make you feel fulfilled. Speaking of more choices, there's this interesting book called The Paradox of Choice, and the thesis is that in modern society, people have way more choices available to them in the past, everything from food to entertainment to careers, but this unlimited number of options can actually cause us to be less happy with our decisions. It can lead to feelings of missed opportunities like, oh, I picked option A, but would B or C have been better? Gee, I don't know. We all want that validation that the thing we bought or the decision we made was the best one, and that gets harder the more choices there are. In the book, they do this experiment at a farmer's market with jars of jam. One day they set up a booth with 6 different kinds, the next day 24 different kinds. Guess which day sold more? The day with 6 different kinds sold 10 times as many jars. The simplicity made it more approachable. People were intimidated by the booth with 24. The brain has to exert energy in order to make decisions the same way muscles exert energy to do physical tasks. That's why it's possible to actually get a headache and experience choice overload when the mental effort required to pick one seems overwhelming. They found that after about 12 choices, people's brains would just glaze over and give up. Sometimes they'll also nickname this the Netflix effect, where you just scroll through the choices forever because there's endless choices and the last thing you want to do is pick the wrong one. I just think that's so ironic because we often define freedom as having unlimited choices, but very easily we can end up being prisoners of choice. I think the older son in the prodigal son story probably suffered from that type of fear. If he leaves, anything could happen. The farm could collapse without him. Things could go bad for him the same way they went bad for his brother. He's definitely the more responsible brother, but by being afraid of change, he puts up these walls around himself and he really limits his future. If you can learn to be confident in your decisions and trust that God isn't going to let you step on a rake as long as you're making positive choices, then you gain freedom from doubt and fear of the wrong decision. Now, about 6 years ago, I've been working at this engineering firm for a few years, but I was still very much a new guy. Most of the tasks I was getting assigned were glorified busy work or boring stuff. I watched a few people who started around the same time as I did get to do interesting stuff, like take tours of battery factories or travel out to wind farms. And whenever I didn't get picked to do that stuff, it didn't just make me feel jealous, it made me feel like no one trusted me, like I was still stuck with the training wheels on. I worried that I might get stuck doing menial things forever because the opportunity to prove myself might never come along. I can't help but wonder if the prodigal son felt that way too, because the story starts with him asking for his share of money. We just have to infer why he wants to leave so badly. And then one day this email comes along that they need someone to travel up to New Jersey to be part of this big construction project to rebuild a power plant that got destroyed during a hurricane. And I was so hungry for that extra responsibility that I volunteered immediately. No second thought. It's like the story where Jesus recruits the disciples who are fishermen. He tells them to throw down the nets and come on. Sometimes dropping everything and leaving life behind sounds crazy, even if it is to follow Jesus. But when we find ourselves stuck in monotony, we're more likely to jump at opportunities. And I jumped at this one. Now, if you've never been to New Jersey, just picture a nice suburb, and then picture the Stranger Things upside down, nightmare world version of that. I got there in January. I didn't see the sun for the first 4 days because it was so dark and rainy. When I first showed up on the construction site, I didn't know where to park, who to talk to, where to go. I was getting bombarded with questions I didn't know the answer to. That responsibility hot potato was firmly in my hand, and I started to wonder if this was a be careful what you wish for situation. To save money, I was staying in this nightmare Airbnb. It was a dusty spare bedroom in this old house owned by an Austrian guy named Tom. You don't meet too many people from Austria. There's like three famous Austrians: Arnold Schwarzenegger, Mozart, Adolf Hitler. So hit or miss. The bed was an old futon with a dusty quilt on top, and the heat didn't work. I remember the first time I woke up in the middle of the night, I could see my breath inside. Now this guy, Tom, he embodied all the prodigal son qualities. He had left his mom back in Austria to move to New York and pursue his dream of being a chef. For whatever reason, that didn't work out. And now he was living in his father's old house in New Jersey, basically taking care of it in exchange for a place to stay. He didn't have a job, so every day he would just get up to the craziest stuff. I remember one night he had a date over. I asked, "Where'd you meet her?" He said, "At the Westminster Dog Show in New York." I said, "You had to be like a billionaire to go to that." But no, tickets were like $20. One day he asked if I wanted to go into the city and see all the tourist spots like Central Park, Empire State Building. I said, "Sure." I wanted to take the bus. He insisted we take his dad's 2003 BMW with the convertible roof, but it was broken, so we were just cruising along in January with the top down. On the way there, he stopped at Target to return a half-empty bottle of shampoo, and then at the Apple store to have a heated argument with them over why they should replace his cracked phone, even though it was not under warranty. He was a very confrontational guy. He was also a horrible driver. Going over the bridge into New York, he realized we were in the wrong lane, not just the wrong lane, like 5 lanes over wrong. And so he cuts over almost horizontal 5 lanes at once, and then the bridge police immediately pull us over. He doesn't have his license, not even an Austrian license, and no registration. I remember I opened the glove compartment, it was empty. When have you ever seen an empty glove compartment? And at this point I'm thinking, good grief, why did I come along for this nightmare? But for some reason the cops ended up letting us go, probably because we were blocking a whole lane of traffic and they didn't want to deal with it. And as we drove away, Tom started going off on how everyone was out to get him and how unfair it was that he had to deal with this stuff. And I didn't say it, but I was annoyed that he didn't accept responsibility for anything and then complain when these bad things happened to him. They were mostly self-inflicted. The whole time I was there, I was waking up at 6 a.m. working at the construction site, 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, because it was behind schedule. And he would come in at all hours of the night and wake me up, and it was frustrating, but at the same time, I couldn't help but be a little envious of this carefree lifestyle he had, because it was so different from mine. It was more adventurous. And then one night, right before I went back home, we were sitting at the table eating this beef Wellington he made. He would always make these really good dishes in this like dingy kitchen, which was funny, but he got really emotional and he started talking about how he wanted to get his career back on track and be a chef again, and how he wished he could be more responsible. He said, "You've got it all figured out. You're up at 6 a.m. every day, going for a run every night. Your career's on track." And that's when I realized he was envious of me. We were just like the two sons. I was the older son that came there seeking responsibility. He was the younger son that had come for freedom. But we were both missing that other piece to feel fulfilled. And it ended up being a valuable lesson for me. The prodigal son story ends before we get a chance to see the brothers face to face again. I'd like to think that the older son got over his anger and tried to see things from his younger brother's perspective. I'm sure the younger son looked at his brother and thought, "Gosh, why'd I have to screw everything up? Why couldn't I just have been like him?" When I was talking to some of the other speakers, we said there's a reason the story isn't called Good Son, Bad Son. Because even though it focuses on the mistakes of one, they both have so much to learn from each other. And really the Bible is full of stories about God giving people tasks they aren't quite ready for. Mary and Joseph were not equipped for the baby Jesus. When God talks to Moses through the burning bush and tells him to free the Israelites, Moses doesn't want to do it. He has a whole list of excuses. And God gets angry because he knows Moses can do it. Sometimes we need God to be that mother bird pushing us out of the nest, because if not, we won't learn to fly. The one person in the prodigal son story who emulates freedom and responsibility is the father. To just give away half your estate, your money, without a second thought is a freedom over fear and worry that very few people have. For most of the story, his children are going in polar opposite directions, his family's splitting apart. But he's level-headed and responsible enough to fix the relationship between the two. He forgives the younger son, makes peace with the older one. He shows wisdom because he knows what the important choices are. He can choose anger and resentment or love and forgiveness. He knows that you can't fix people's problems and addictions by yelling and being mad. He makes the right choice. And even though we don't see it, we can assume the family weathers the storm. And because he isn't weighed down by regret or anger, he's the one who's truly free. Will you pray with me? Dear God, please walk with us as we try to navigate life's choices from the mundane to the life-changing. Keep us safe from fear and the doubt of failure. We thank you for the freedom you give us to learn and for your patience with our mistakes. Help us to treat those around us with that same compassion and understanding.